Broadcom and Taiwan Semi are reportedly considering deals that would split Intel in two. Joining us right now to talk about that and much more is Vivek Arya, Bank of America's senior semiconductor analyst. And Vivek, let's talk about this because right now it looks like Intel shares are up by about 6.5% on these reports. What do you make of them?
Good morning, Becky. I think, first of all, from a sector perspective, consolidation has been a key part of the semiconductor sector over the last dozen years. Every year it has made the sector a lot more profitable. You know, an average semiconductor company has 2 or 3 times the free cash flow generation capability of an average industrial company in the S&P 500. What it's also saying is that AI has been a theme and has been a very important theme. And if you don't have an AI pipeline, then you're kind of more subject to being taken over and being split up, which is what Intel is seeing. Having said all that, I think there are challenges in any kind of potential breakup, right? We have to say that none of these companies have made any official statements, so a lot of these are assumptions at this stage. But what makes this situation very tricky is, number one, that the way Intel manufactures its products is very different than the way TSMC manufactures its products, so it's hard to see TSMC just essentially take over all of Intel's manufacturing because there are differences in the way they manufacture products. There could be synergies of scale for TSMC. And when it comes to Broadcom, for them to consider Intel's PC and server design business means a very extended regulatory process, especially in China. And, you know, the last time Broadcom tried to buy a company back in 2017, when they tried to take over Qualcomm, it took a very long time, and unfortunately, it did not result in a successful endeavor. So I think a lot has to happen before we get to the other side of this.
I agree with everything you've just said. I guess what makes this a little different is that TSMC is kind of getting dragged into this because of a request coming from the Trump administration. How does that change the scenario? The idea that the Trump administration would like to see them get involved with the factories, and the U.S. has put a lot of money into several $1 billion over the last couple of years into Intel and wants to make sure that they can make sure that there are chips being manufactured in the United States.
Right. For sure. We have seen a CHIPS Act give money to not just Intel, by the way. CHIPS Act has made a lot of allocation to Taiwan Semi, who is also making factories in Arizona. Many of those factories can serve AI customers here in the U.S. So it's not true that Intel is the only option for making advanced semiconductors in the U.S. You know, TSMC is an important option and is becoming a bigger option, number one. Number two is that TSMC publicly has not shown interest in buying all of Intel. Whether they can consider part of Intel, part of Intel's manufacturing is a separate situation, and maybe they could. But until there is a room for all of Intel's manufacturing in one clean place, even Broadcom, according to media reports, is not interested in looking at the product side. So I agree with you that there is absolutely a lot of interest in making sure that Intel succeeds. It's an iconic brand name, but so far there is no proposal on the table that has room for all of Intel's manufacturing under one clean entity.
So Intel shares are up 6.5%, Broadcom down by about 0.4%, and last I saw, Taiwan Semiconductor was flat. It sounds like you would not be making any moves until you hear more about what's really going on behind the scenes here?
That's right. I mean, we have an underperform on Intel because they don't have an AI pipeline and because their manufacturing is still significantly behind. And just TSMC taking a small stake is not going to change any of those scenarios. So we think it's quite speculative at this stage.
Very quickly, let me ask you about Nvidia. They're going to be reporting their earnings next month. Or next week. They've obviously had so many questions about what's going on post DeepSeek, whether there's going to be demand for their chips. But we did hear from all of the big majors, whether that be Amazon, Meta, Alphabet, any of them, looking at spending even more next time around this year for CapEx. How do you feel about the shares, given the pullback that we've seen in Nvidia shares as a result?
Sure, absolutely. You know, when DeepSeek came out, somebody compared it to the Sputnik moment. I think it has been kind of a Sputnik moment because the U.S. spending on defense and aerospace went up, 10, 20-fold in the decade following that Sputnik moment. So, since DeepSeek news came out, we have seen, I think, Becky, to your point, the US hyperscalers raised their capex. What was supposed to be a 20% growth year is now over a 30% growth year, over 360 billion. We have seen Stargate being announced with $500 billion of spending over multiple years. And then last week, what I think probably went unnoticed is the intention of European customers to spend. The European Commission announced a 200 billion euro program. France announced a 109 billion euro program, all for investing in AI. So we think this is a long-term theme. When it comes to NVIDIA's earnings specifically, they are going through a product transition. There are China kind of restriction headwinds. So it's possible that the quarter they guide, might be a tad squishy, but we look forward. The stock is trading at the lower end of its valuation range. I think it is absolutely a leader in being able to benefit from a lot of this spending. So we would be buyers of NVIDIA. It's our top pick. But as I mentioned, that earnings are always a volatile time frame. But right after earnings, we think NVIDIA's GPU technology conference will help to put the positive momentum back in the stock.